you so much, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It is DC Pro Bono Week. We are here to talk about a huge need for pro bono representation and family law specifically. So this is It Takes a Village, highlighting the value of pro bono representation and family law. As you are joining us and putting your name and organization in the chat to let us know who's here, as we have some other people longing on, we'd like to also launch a few poll questions just to see who's in the audience, kind of where you're from, and if you have familiarity with family law and what you might be looking for or interested in when it comes to pro bono participation in this area of practice. So tell us about you. You're going to see a few questions. The first one is just to describe your position. If you can fill that out, whether you're a law student or from the government, law firm, public interest, etc. The second question is going to ask just to rate wherever you think you fall, from least to more experienced in family law, whether that's personal experience, professional experience, as a student, as a lawyer, anything at all. And then what types of pro bono opportunities you might be interested in, whether it's full representation, limited scope, clinics, or research. And you can select all that apply. So I'll give people a little bit of time just to fill that out. Thank you.
It looks like we have almost everyone participating in the poll.
Yes, looks
A
good.
lot of folks joining us from law firms and a lot of folks who are not confident in their family law experience, but I would think that they're probably more experienced than they give themselves credit.
A lot of interest across just the spectrum of pro bono opportunities as well. That's great. Hey, looks like if you launched those results, Chris, that looks great. Okay, we see a mixture. So thank you for sharing a little bit about yourselves so we know who's in the audience today. We will be recording today's session if you want to go back to it or share it with a colleague or friend who wasn't able to make it. We are, again, here to talk about the need and the value of pro bono representation in family law. This includes a broad spectrum of need, serving different types of clients and litigants inside and outside of family court at DC Superior Court in DC. You're going to hear, especially today, a great view from the bench from Associate Judge Becker, who is what we sometimes are referring as a second tour of duty in the domestic relations branch at DC Superior Court. So I'm excited to have her perspective to share with all of you today. And to get started, we're actually going to have our panelists introduce themselves and share what their experience has been regarding the need for pro bono representation in family law matters. And I will turn it over to Your Honor, the Honorable Julie Becker, to begin introductions. Thank you so much again for joining us.
All right, can everybody hear me? Okay, all right. Hi, everyone. I am Julie Becker. I am an associate judge at Superior Court. I have been at the court for about 8 years now. I sit on the domestic relations bench. I'm one of the 7 DR judges. And this is my second tour of duty through DR, my 3rd year here, so my 6th year altogether in DR. And my experience with pro bono attorneys is wonderful, and that we need many, many more of them. As you're going to hear, I think probably more than once, the vast majority of litigants in family court are self-represented, and having an attorney makes so much of a difference in their ability to get their cases out, get the information that they need to present, and then present it in a way that is useful and makes sense and helps make their case. So we love it when you all show up.
Thank you so much. Meridel, if you can share a little bit about yourself from Legal Aid DC.
Sure, thank you. My name's Meridel Bulle-Vu. I'm one of the supervising attorneys in our domestic violence family law practice at Legal Aid DC. A big part of our domestic violence unit practice is representing survivors and seeking protection orders against the person who's abused them. Almost all of those survivors who have a child in common go on to then be involved in a custody case. And just by nature of the two different practices, we're not able to represent all of those domestic violence survivor clients then in their custody cases, which I don't want to scare anyone into saying they're too long, but are just longer proceedings than the very brief civil protection order cases. And just because of the way that protection orders usually result in consents to an order without the court actually having a trial and making any findings, it means that it pushes that litigation into the custody sphere. And so the survivors are left to then, to try to litigate and present evidence of the trauma, the abuse, the threats that they've suffered without a lawyer. And so having pro bono lawyers get involved really helps to close that gap a little bit between the people that we're able to continue to represent and just the vast need. And that's really just one little wedge of the pie of the clients that are in custody court, but the one I just wanted to highlight today.
Thank you. And turning over to some other litigants in that same space, Jenadee from the DC Bar Pro Bono Center.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jenadee Nanini. I'm the managing attorney for family law and immigration at the Pro Bono Center. Also with Meridel, we both work and staff the Family Law Assistance Network, or FLAN, which is a brief service program at the court. I will say, to second Meridel's point, that is a huge issue. We often need a lot of attorneys to fill that gap, both for divorce and custody after those civil protective orders. We represent petitioners and respondents, plaintiffs and defendants, and parents and third-party caregivers. So there's always a gap within that space, some fallout after the protective order, whether it was the alleged abuser or found abuser or the survivor. Those cases often are litigated after in the DRB. And separately, we see a huge gap with accused abusers or parents who have been accused of child abuse or neglect or have been unstable in the past for one or many reasons. Maybe it's incarceration, mental health, we're not in the child's life, and then want to re-enter and stabilize. And so it's really important people who maybe have not the best facts or the best history, but now want to get back in their child's life or want to stabilize their families because they're now at a better place. We have a hard time placing those cases, and it's such a huge need to make sure that the other party is safe, that that person is safe, and that the children are safe in that process. And so we think it's really important to get pro bono attorneys to help make sure those protective orders are honored, right? So that everyone's safe and that the children are safe.
Thanks, Jenadee. And finally, Melody from Mothers Outreach Network, who can share a little bit more about some of the parents that Jenadee was referencing, but in a different sphere.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jenadee. So my name's Melody Webb and pronouns are she, her. I'm the executive director and I lead the legal practice of Mothers Outreach Network, and it's a multi-pronged advocacy nonprofit. And we really work by organizing with mothers who have lived experience with the child welfare or family regulation system. So in addition to our brief advice, legal representation, education, we do lots of policy advocacy and, as I said, organizing. So our experience of the need is in all of our family law related practice areas, and our work, as opposed to custody and court-based, is more administrative in nature. And we represent parents at the early stages of involvement with child protective services. Where CPS, initiates an investigation, we're giving them advice and representation. They'll want information about what's happening with their investigation. And our goal is really early on to try to assist them in addressing that, those, and to prevent further progression of the case to a removal. So we have difficulty recruiting people pro bono to work with us on that. We have recently made inroads with regard to obtaining assistance on sort of creating materials, educational materials, and we invite more of that. We also operate a family law related parents tax credit clinic, which also attracts interest when we do volunteer recruitment, because we provide advice on eligibility and sort of completing tax returns throughout the year. We are interested in recruiting not only during tax season, but outside of that. So that's just a little bit of when we do have pro bono involvement, we're very happy with it and encourage more of it.
Thank you so much. So you can hear a spectrum of those on the panel. You can see my background in the Children's Law Center. I'm a pro bono director, and we rely heavily on pro bono volunteers in the area of family law, DC Superior Court, primarily looking for volunteers to serve as best interest attorneys called guardians ad litem, who represent the best interest of children in contested custody cases. We also represent some of the third-party caregivers in custody cases, similar to the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. One of the statistics that you've maybe heard or maybe haven't from the DC Access to Justice Commission's 2019 report, which still holds true as far as we all know today, is that 83 to 93% of litigants in family court are unrepresented. So like Judge Becker and her colleagues, there are days that judges are not seeing lawyers in these hearings, whether it is a contested custody case or divorce, child support. And then also you've heard about the overlap of domestic violence, and then going beyond the courtroom, those cases and matters that need a lot of administrative support that Melody's speaking about, with parents who might have allegations of abuse and neglect. If you're familiar with that part of the courthouse where parents do have lawyers, that comes later in the process after children are removed. So the work that Melody's talking about, you don't have lawyers involved, prior to that point. And so the need is extremely high. You're hearing folks talk about the importance of getting their case, the relevant information about their case to the appropriate listener, whether it's the judge or someone else. And so there's a lot when we talked about this topic about barriers to representation and family law and myths that we might dispel. And so I want to ask the panel, whoever would like to speak up first, to just describe one or a couple, if you'd like to pick, some of the myths that are common in family law that we might dispel together today as people are thinking about providing pro bono work in this area.
I can go, Jen. Just generally, this is a system built for lawyers, right? And so it works better when people have access to this system. It operates better for everybody and their families long term. And so having a lawyer on all sides is great, whether it's for the child, the plaintiff, the defendant, et cetera. And there's a range of ways to get involved on this panel and beyond. And I think one of the biggest myths that I see when placing pro bono cases with family law is there's this judgment, right? Of what a good parent is and what a bad parent is, what a nuclear family is, what a good family is, what a good situation is. And I think it's so important to just suspend judgment and realize that because a parent was incarcerated or maybe was suffering from addiction or has a mental health issue, that doesn't make them a bad parent. And they still have legal rights, whatever side they're on. And there's a way for you to get involved and help stabilize that family and provide safety and security. And provide legal resources, but then a lot of times people need resources connected beyond the court. And you're really the person that can say, hey, I know a great referral for XYZ. And those are all things that are going to stabilize the family. And so I think the biggest myth we see are what I call the sticky facts or the bad facts, right? That make people a bad, quote unquote, bad parent. And I think that doesn't mean that they don't deserve representation or access to the court.
I'll also jump in. The parents that we assist, and these parents, show up at everyone on this panel sort of like programs. They're involved with what we know of as the abuse and neglect system. We experience trouble, as I mentioned before, obtaining pro bono legal representation in matters that involve them. So there is a myth that there are much larger numbers of families or parents who are involved in the system. And a lot of people don't realize that 80% of the cases in DC are neglect related versus abuse related. So just kind of focusing on that, let's think about that. And I am the person who brought like a citation from the DC code, child neglect in DC, as in, I think all of the states, includes poverty factors. It includes, harm to a child's health or welfare, which occurs through the failure to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, education, or medical care. So, poverty factors, we know at least 12% of the cases, and we think the number is much higher. In that system involve housing insecurity. And we do have tools to address these issues. Sometimes it's trying to get a hold of the family unification program vouchers, and then also just making people aware that poverty is a major driver of involvement in the system. So just being more aware of, the demographics and what people really are grappling with is important. And we, truly believe, I think all on this panel, that all families are deserving. And we, there's just been a recognition nationally, for example, in 2022, a division of the ABA adopted Resolution 606, which, called on all legal professionals to recognize how some of these systems over surveil and underinvest in Black families. So, this is really important for us to grapple with. And, in terms of preserving families, it's very important that, we consider supporting families in the way of legal representation.
I'll also jump in and try to bust the myth that family law is not real litigation. Unlike some other areas of pro bono work you might do, let me assure you it very much is real litigation. The custody cases, the overarching standard is best interests of the child. And sometimes that's a little squishy, but really it's not. There's really law governing what the best interest factors are and how they intersect with other statutes governing child custody and governing family law. And these are also real civil cases. There's a complaint and an answer, and there's discovery, and eventually there's a trial with the rules of evidence and everything. So it is very much real litigation and meant, as Jenadee said, meant to be done by lawyers. And it is a much better adversarial outcome when it's done by lawyers.
Thank you for that, Judge Becker. I will just kind of wrap this up by talking about the divorce cases Jenadee mentioned. I think one myth we see is that, our organization's clients who are low or no income, don't need a lawyer for a divorce because why would they? They don't have property. And that really is just really false. There can be debts that can be even more devastating for one party to have to continue paying on their own without that having been equitably split or looked at by the court. And really, when resources are tighter, it makes the decisions all that more important. Because just a small error one way or the other, the omission of one type of property from the court's consideration can have just a huge impact on whether one party ends up destitute after the marriage dissolves. And so a lot of people who are unrepresented in court aren't aware of what constitutes property. So they might not realize, maybe equity in the home is a little bit more obvious if they own a property, but there can be federal retirement benefits that, will pay out in the future and could keep someone from, aging, or can give them the ability to age with dignity. And so having a lawyer involved really ensures that everything is looked at, the full picture, and can help to do what can be really kind of complicated for, if you're not used to it, but especially if you're a pro se party, just trying to figure out what documents need to be submitted to split up a retirement account. It's not rocket science. Everyone on this call, from the law students on up, could do it. But for our clients to try to navigate that on their own when they're dealing with so many other challenges is really just a hurdle too far.
Well, thank you. Yes, so there are lots of myths that I think come up in this area, and that ties a little bit to just the concept of cultural humility, checking biases, assumptions. There are little pieces of information that you might hear or read about in this practice of law, and it's quick to have an idea pop into your head and an opinion about something or conclusion about something. And a lot of things can really turn into myths that can be dispelled by actual, information and experience. And so if you are to take a pro bono case in this area and work with any of the organizations on today's panel, you will have support, mentoring, training. And so if I can bust one last myth, it would be, I can't do family law. I don't have experience doing this. I think sometimes people might not be in the place of passing judgment or having, some type of negative reaction to doing this type of work other than the confidence in themselves to do it. The thought that, okay, I can make a difference and not make things worse. This is really compelling, whatever the needs are. I want to make sure that I'm, talented and trained enough to be able to do this. And I've never done it before. And so our volunteers are oftentimes handling a family law case for the first time when they're handling it pro bono. You've heard Judge Becker and all of our domestic relations judges repeat the desire for more pro bono lawyers. They are welcomed into our courtrooms, which is a really great thing. And you're not getting quizzed on what your experience is. You're getting noticed for being a lawyer in the courtroom and doing the things that you're hearing everyone talk about that can make a difference in this system really designed for lawyers. So I would bust that myth of having experience before. It's a very thoughtful process into matching cases with volunteers, thinking about what you're interested in doing. And we asked that question at the beginning, what would you like to do? Something more short or long term? There is a variety, and we'll end today's panel discussion with talking more about those things. But as we think big picture to access to justice and this need for a lawyer for everyone, and thinking back to the statistics where most folks do not have lawyers in any of the matters that we're talking about today, I'd like to just hear from the panelists in your view and experience where you're working now, what you've done before. How does this connect, the idea of having lawyers for everyone in family law? Why does that, or how does that contribute to access to justice?
I'm happy to start off again. I think it goes back to what I said, right? The system is designed for lawyers. People don't have the access, often the terminology, to know exactly what is needed or how to navigate the overall process. I mean, you think of service of process itself, that rule is super complicated. And for a pro se party to read that and truly understand what to do and how to do is just simply not fair, right? We need lawyers to help people navigate it, to hold their rights, to hold the line. And the system works better when everybody has a lawyer. If you have a protective order against someone and they don't know what it means to obey it or what they need to do, that person theoretically maybe isn't as safe as we would think, or the family or the children. And so having everyone represented really gives a more balanced outcome, I think. And an outcome that works, right? We want this to work. We don't want people back in court all the time. We don't want just a Band-Aid put on it. We want, kind of what Judge Lopez says, a parenting plan till they're 18. And how can we work this out and make sure that it works for this specific family, because every family is different. And having people there to negotiate those little nuances and help people understand their rights and understand their obligations really makes things work better for each specific family.
And I would just jump in and say, to the extent that we value, parenting is a fundamental constitutional right. And so, and yet we can see many examples of how parents are not accessing that right and those rights. So in our case, parents are just not entitled to representation at the outset of an investigation. We thought about that sort of in a criminal law context, we can appreciate better where the gap is. And, it's in this particular type of case, it's as if, a police department investigated a crime with regard to, parenting rights where there's an investigation by Child and Family Services Agency. It's as if they investigated a crime, concluded an individual was guilty, and did not file charges or provide them with an attorney. So in this administrative level, a parent can undergo an investigation. Their children can be questioned, and they can, under DC law now not have access to counsel through that process. Again, using the criminal law analogy, it's, the parent is told he has to agree to go to jail for several weeks or months, again, without access to counsel, in this context. And then we have in the sort of hidden foster care situation, which is one where, the administrative agency here approaches a parent without, again, providing them access to counsel, and essentially at times coerces them into placing their child in the care of a relative. And then that relative, ends up in Judge Becker's courtroom, perhaps, seeking permanent or temporary custody of the child. So this series of steps that occur, all without the support of counsel, and an involvement of an attorney would make such a big difference in that parent's life, and allowing them to access, what is really, a fundamental constitutionally protected right. So it's just very compelling to have access to counsel and justice.
And I'll add on to that, not only is parenting a fundamental constitutional right, but I think for most parents, it's the most important thing we'll ever do, right? And your children are the most important thing you'll ever have in your life. And so what that means for parents coming into court is that it's often very, very emotional, especially when you layer on that the other side is somebody that you had some kind of a romantic relationship, usually, or it could be your mother if it's a third-party custody case. And so all of that emotion comes into the courtroom. And I think when people are representing themselves, it can get in the way of their ability to kind of figure out what's important to present and what is not, and sort of lead people to focus on a lot of attention and information on something that may not be as salient in their case, whereas they'll miss some other major fact that would really make a difference in how I look at the case. And that's one incredibly important role that lawyers can play, is kind of looking at all the information, getting the whole picture, and then figuring out what to present and how to present it.
The other thing I'll add is that parties where there's lawyers on both sides really are on a different track in court than the parties who are either both or just one of them is unrepresented. Because when there's lawyers involved, like, they have access to just a whole different realm of options. We're extremely lucky that we have Judge Becker and the other DR judges who really are excellent at interacting with unrepresented parties. But there's a limit to what they can do. There's a limit to how much time they can spend, how much they can anticipate every concern that either party might have. When there's lawyers involved, you can be much more creative in terms of the order or the agreement that you put in place. So I think they're much more likely to settle and to have an agreement that at least the parties have some buy-in on, that they feel they were heard, and that the agreement and the order covers their concerns and their anticipated concerns, and sets up, like Jenadee said, a structure, a parenting plan for going forward. And when they have buy-in, it's more likely to be successful. That these are parties who are going to have to continue to cooperate at some level despite whatever might have been in their past. And so creating a structure for that and kind of setting them on a path for success, it feels unfair that there's the track for people who, with lawyers who are kind of on this better road to success than the parties who, have to on their own drag up all of the miseries from their relationship. And, that process in and of itself can create more hostility and tension and kind of, and then they're leaving the court with an order saying, like, go forth and parent together. And that, they're just obviously not in as good of a spot. And so really having a lawyer on both sides is critical, to trying to help the parties move through the process successfully.
Thank you so much. I think, you've all touched on access to resources, to information, also just time. So, you know, if we're looking at the domestic relations branch in court and those matters that are before judges, or if you're thinking about how administrative processes may move quickly or in an uncertain or unknown way for families, that Melody's office is supporting, there's not a lot of time for families to move through the emotions that are involved in the court hearings. You know, if you've got a judge with 300 to 400 cases on their docket and 20-30 minutes in a status hearing with lots to cover, and people have a lot that they want to say, circling back to Judge Becker's point, you know, those emotions do truly get in the way of getting all of the most relevant information before the fact finder, and that impacts the decisions that they're able to make. And so lawyers are supporting access to justice by getting the information, the resources, the time to litigants, and the idea of being heard, respected, family integrity, all of these things is huge too. I think I've spoken with a lot of people about family law over the years, and I think it really is a square peg in a round hole. And so trying to kind of sort through the systems involved and the logistics of just navigating everything, while really dealing with people's most personal, intimate issues and things that they hold so sacred and dear and really matter. It's a lot to kind of pull together and figure out next steps. And so lawyers can play a huge role, not being a part of that conflict, not being constrained by 20 or 30 minutes in a courtroom with the judge that has to move on and you're kind of triggered by another person in that space. There's a lot of opportunities that lawyers can support folks outside of the courtroom. And before they ever make it to a courtroom, hopefully, you know, in Melody's circumstances for the community members she's serving. So there's so much to be said for this need. We're nowhere near meeting it. But the good news is that there are lots of different providers in the city who have opportunities available. There is a spectrum. So for the myths or sometimes realities of these matters taking quote unquote too long, however you might define it, there are shorter term opportunities. There are ways to gain some experience if you want to do something on a shorter term before you take on a full representation case. So I want to be able to turn to the panelists to really talk more specifically about opportunities. But at the same time, I want to just note that we have the chat and the Q&A option. So feel free to put any remarks, comments, thoughts, additions to the conversation so far in the chat. And certainly feel free to add any questions that you would like answered. We'll have time at the end to go through questions with attendees. We can turn off the recording for that if people would like to come off mute or otherwise share really candid questions. But I will now just ask this of the panelists. So how can interested pro bono volunteers get involved in the work that you do? What does that really look like? What are the requirements, if any, and what type of representation or support might they offer, whether it's limited scope, research, clinics, full representation, and what are the training, mentoring supports that you would offer someone doing this work who doesn't have experience or much of it? Meridel, you want to kick this one off?
Thank you so much, Jen. Yeah, so Legal Aid DC refers family law cases, mostly custody that I was talking about. Some of those can include child support, which can also feel very intimidating, but is not and doesn't have to be. It's really just math, which lawyers don't necessarily love, but there's a calculator online that makes it really easy. And some of the cases also involve divorce, which similarly, I think some people are a little bit hesitant to get involved in a divorce case. Some of those are very straightforward, where there's not a lot of issues with the divorce and it's really just a custody case. And some of them, like I said before, there is a need to do some discovery to figure out what exists and kind of what things can be divided. So for the most part, we're trying to place cases for full representation in that matter. So that doesn't mean until the kid's 18 or 21 for child support. It just means like for the motion or complaint or petition that's before the court. So for the duration of that until the court resolves it. We provide training and access to other trainings, including the pro bono centers and the, Washington Council of Lawyers and all of the many resources that we're very lucky to have in DC. But we also do expert mentoring. So I or one of my colleagues will talk with our pro bono partners about the case throughout the course of it. So if they're trying to assess strategy or figure out how to, approach a particular legal issue, or if they want kind of some information about how the judge generally holds what process they'll kind of go through, or what a status hearing is, because that's really an amorphous concept for a lot of people. We're there every step of the way to talk to the pro bono lawyers and to give them the support they need to feel confident in advocating for the client. We also do have some limited scope opportunities. So for example, helping someone respond to discovery or file a protective order about some discovery that goes a little too far, is invasive. That piece alone in a divorce case can be invaluable if you're helping somebody get the information about what assets exist so that they know what relief to even ask for. We might have an opportunity for someone to review a potential agreement, right? If there's a lawyer on the other side and they have an agreement, parties will come to us and say, should I sign this? And that takes some amount of time, right? It takes some amount of our time, but that's something that a lot of lawyers could very confidently review, advise someone on, make sure that the terms are equal and fair, make sure it encompasses everything that the party wants included, and advise. And that could be just a matter of a couple hours, right? But that, again, is really an invaluable service to that otherwise unrepresented party. So we're continuing to be creative to figure out ways for pro bono lawyers to get involved in less than a full representation. I think if that's something that interests someone, we would love to hear about it, where you could say, I would be up for this, or I could commit this many hours-ish, right? Please let me know if you have something like that. And we would love to work with you to kind of find the right fit between this overwhelming need and what part of it you're able to help with. So thank you.
Jenadee, would you like to continue sort of the
Sure.
in-court pro bono opportunities?
Yes, I will just say the Pro Bono Center places family law cases, custody, divorce, child support, parentage, special immigrant juvenile predicate orders. I will say it's pretty much the same flow and description as Meridel, so I want to not be redundant to you all. We do the same thing. We place cases. We provide an internal family law mentor and also an external mentor. So we have members of the private family bar that volunteer to mentor. So you'll get 2 mentors. We have trainings, forms. We work with you throughout the life of the case. We have litigation funds if that's an issue. So if you need to depose someone or order documents, etc., we have litigation funds for that. We also place cases in a range of levels. So from brief services, limited scope, up to full representation. I will say one of the big ones that is great if you don't want to get in court necessarily, but want to help, is discovery, both issuing and responding to it. It often holds up a lot of cases, and it's a way you can enter the case for that part, help them out, and then get out of the case. Another great way we have limited scope opportunities is simply to negotiate or mediate, right? Like Meridel was saying earlier, working out a plan that works for all parties. And there's all types of alternative dispute resolution that you could enter a limited scope for and then leave to help get that document drafted or get that resolution. You may also just appear for one motion or one hearing at court, which is a limited way, which is great, or to help on a couple hearings until a resolution or a temporary order is resolved. And so there are multiple ways, both outside and inside of court, that you can help. I will say we also have research projects or maybe pro se materials that you can volunteer for too. So we're always looking ways to revamp law help or make pro se materials or handouts. And you can volunteer to maybe make a handout on discovery or a handout on something, service. So those are all ways that you can get involved.
Okay, and
Thank
I'll
you.
just
And
jump in.
Melody. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks,
sure.
Melody.
So yes, great. So for our administrative practice, the Child Protection Register placement is another area we practice in. And so you could assist with fair hearings, appeals, of placement on the Child Protection Register. And assistance could be at any part of that process. In fact, helping kind of to talk with the client and elicit information and then prepare a memo that could be submitted to the agency prior to the fair hearing itself. That often results in successful appeal. One could also, kind of assist the parent in the early stages of representation with making inquiries, to the agency, and also just helping with an assessment of what the options are. For example, in the case I mentioned before of where the agency gets involved, where there's concern and they attempt to have the parent place the child with a relative caregiver, maybe your assistance could be in helping to navigate and sort of put together alternative arrangements. Sometimes parents do need respite and assistance, but with your help, perhaps they could help, kind of put together an agreement. It could be in the form of safety plan, or it could be in the form of, guardianship. So there are options that could be explored. And then there's also in the fair hearing process, something that's a quasi-mediation, the program administrator review, and perhaps you could assist in representing the parent at that point in that sort of quasi-mediation. So there are a number of different ways. As I mentioned before, our tax clinic, parents tax credit clinic is also very popular, and there could be opportunities throughout the year to get trained. We do have a very committed pro bono lawyer who helped us put that project together. And you could work with him and actually advise parents and help us actually do workshops, as mentioned before. Those are a lot of fun, partnering with providers in the community or with our sort of internal programs. We also can provide, support and would probably co-counsel with you. And these are very, very short, very simple matters in many cases. We are one of a growing number of programs around the country that are running these early defense programs. So you could, get connected with that community of people. And then finally, I'll say our Know Your Rights project, we're really trying to grow it and put together more materials that are parent friendly online. So we would love, for you all to contact us and explore ways that you could be helpful in one or more of what I've just described. So thank you.
Thank you all so much. That's wealth of opportunities and a spectrum of opportunities. I'll add to the list to say at Children's Law Center for our family law pro bono work. Again, we are looking for volunteers to represent third-party caregivers in custody matters, as well as serve where there's a tremendous need as guardian ad litem best interest attorneys for children in the contested custody cases. So where most families, again, bringing it back to poverty statistics, most people cannot afford a lawyer for themselves in the matter. And so you're hearing about that need today. And so what we see, of course, is that they are not able to afford counsel as a guardian ad litem, someone to represent the best interests of the child in the matter. And so the court only has 2 organizations to go to. We both rely heavily on volunteers. And so in both of the matters that we're placing with pro bono attorneys, the third-party caregivers, and the guardian ad litem matters, we are looking for full representation. That is the basis of our model, and we provide training as well as mentoring. So you'll have an expert attorney who knows the area of law, knows the practice, and is there to just talk it through. I went to visit this, how do I interact with a child of this age? What do I do, as a next step, strategizing for this next hearing, or this matter matter looks like it might be going to settle, what are some tips for, next steps and bringing the parties together? How might you handle X, Y, and Z? There's no question off the table. And then if it is a matter, not everything goes to trial. Sometimes we find that lawyers really are helping navigate the process such that the issues in dispute are resolved. Or at least streamlined. But if it does go to trial, you have a mentor to be able to bounce ideas off and strategize for that preparation as well. So lots of support, no matter the organization that you work with, lots of needs. So we would be happy for you to participate in any of these organizations and others not represented today, whether it's family court inside the courthouse, family law outside the courthouse. Of course, we're not right on point for domestic violence today, but you see the overlap of that need as well. So the needs are high. We also do education and housing matters. You've heard Jenadee talk about overseeing immigration work. There is just such a need for pro bono in DC, and there are lots of ways to get involved. So sometimes I've found people reaching out and just asking their specific questions, maybe sharing their own myths to bust, can be helpful to navigate and find the right fit for you. We will be sharing out contact information for the organizations on today's panel. So you can follow up with questions, learn more about upcoming trainings or how mentorship or case matching works. I'll note that the Washington Council of Lawyers also has been partnering with DC Superior Court with judges like Judge Becker and her colleagues to have open houses where you can tour the courthouse, see a hearing observation, and then something that is incredibly valuable is have some downtime with the judges outside of their robes and an informal Q&A just to ask them your questions and hear their perspectives about doing this work. So look out in the future for those events. If anyone attended last week for domestic relations and came again today, thank you so much. But there are lots of ways to just continue this conversation and get information that maybe we haven't covered. So before we wrap for today, I want to just pause and see if we have any questions that have come through or any questions on people's minds now before our session concludes. So I'll just pause and see if we have any.
Jen, I will say one question I
Please.
often get is, do we have malpractice insurance? And
Great one.
yes, we do. So we provide malpractice insurance if you're worried about that, and opportunities to co-counsel with in-house if you are maybe nervous about your first case.
That's great. Those are popular questions. It reminds me of another popular question, and just to touch on whether there are requirements. Law in the District of Columbia. I don't know if I froze just for a second because you all froze for me, but requirements, a typical one is the eligibility to practice law in the District of Columbia. So notice I didn't say DC Bar membership because we actually have a lot of exceptions to DC Bar membership in DC to do pro bono, which is a wonderful tool for us to be able to spread pro bono even further. So if you are not barred in DC, but want to know if you're eligible, you would look at the rule, which is Rule 49 of the DC Court of Appeals. You can Google that and find lots of information. You can reach out to us if you have questions as well about that. But a lot of volunteers are actually not barred in DC, but eligible to practice under an exception. So that's a common question that I think we get as well, in addition to the ones you just noted, Jenadee. Thank you.
Jen, I see a question in the chat about paralegals. How can they help? For us at the Pro Bono Center, we have 2 clinics where paralegals are really helpful. We have our quarterly immigration clinic, but we also have a monthly advice and referral clinic, which covers a ton of family law issues. And so you can help with intake, you can help drafting documents with an attorney, you can help interpreting, which is a huge need. And same for our family law cases. Paralegals often help with trial prep, with discovery collection. They help with interpreting, all types of things you maybe would help with in your office. We can pair you with an attorney to do that as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. We have paralegals pairing up with pro bono lawyers on pro bono cases that we place. And so while there does need to be, this is a great segue, while there does need to be someone eligible to practice DC law, they don't need to be the only person working on the matter. And often when volunteering, and time is of essence for everyone, it's nice to co-counsel or have someone who is a paralegal or other professional who may not be a practicing lawyer work with you. Sometimes it's dividing the workload, whatever the task might be. There's a lot of this work that doesn't require a JD. And so there's plenty of opportunity to partner together. I've seen a lot of paralegals and legal assistants and investigators, et cetera, work with attorneys on family law matters, and they're integral to the team. So I think that's a great partnership, and people shouldn't hesitate to consider those opportunities as well.
We have a question in the Q&A asking if you want to say something about the hybrid proceedings with respect to the DRB, any insights that you might have.
So with respect to the domestic relations branch of family court, where the contested custody or divorce matters may be heard that we've talked about today, the court reimagined itself after the pandemics in 2020. We all switched over to WebEx to figure out how that worked, and then each court division and its branches decided how they would move forward after that. And so we have information on the DC Superior Court webpage that really gets into the nitty-gritty of each calendar. What I'll say for the contested domestic relations cases is that the default is going to be an in-person hearing, but WebEx is still available. And so sometimes parties or attorneys might be appearing remotely. There's a process to ask of the court permission to appear remotely if it is by default or otherwise ordered as an in-person hearing. But you can also observe. These hearings are open to the public. In rare instances, a matter might be sealed or closed for sensitive information. But typically they are all open, and parties can find WebEx information for virtual courtrooms on the court's website as well. So that's a nice way to observe if you're interested in doing that, or if you do have a hearing that's set remotely. During our court tour last week, we observed a judge scheduling a matter, and it looked like it was going to settle, and the judge said, hey, if you reached an agreement, you don't have to come in next time. You can just log on. And so I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to add to that, Judge Becker, in terms of the court's proceedings, but I'll pass to you in case you do.
No, that pretty much covers it. The default is in person. We discovered over the long years of the pandemic that it is very hard to conduct DR cases when everyone is remote for a whole long list of reasons. You know, that said, sometimes there are extenuating circumstances where people need to appear remotely, or sometimes a hearing is going to be so short, like an uncontested divorce, that there's really no need for people to come in so they can stand up in front of us for 5 or 10 minutes. And so, you know, if there are reasons that a party wants to appear remotely, they can always file a motion, and I think we're mostly pretty reasonable. I like to think about granting them.
And thank you to the court's pro bono manager, Jody Feldman, who just dropped those in the chat. So you can check out the remote court hearings there. And if you do choose to hop on to observe a hearing, you never know what you're going to see. Maybe you're seeing a contested case. Maybe you're seeing, 5 minutes of scheduling to try to find a new date because calendars are heavy. Maybe you're seeing some of the emotions running high about a matter of such importance as someone's child and their custody. So you never know exactly what you're going to see. It will be some slice of domestic relations. If you have questions about an observation, I'll offer myself. I imagine others on the panel would be happy to debrief with you, or hear you say, this is what I saw, and we can offer back, oh, that's pretty typical. but you can write observer in your WebEx name. If you were to log on, you might have a courtroom clerk just check to see who you are. They're just looking out to get people checked in, or if there are witnesses, if it's an evidentiary hearing. But unless the matter is closed for some reason, which is rare, you would be more than welcome, and you can simply let them know that you're observing, as these matters are public. So you can feel free to check out those links. I know we're coming up at the end of the hour. I'll just pause in case there are any last questions or closing thoughts from any of the panelists.
I just want to say, as an organization that really focuses on empowering and supporting parents, that pro bono representation is so critically important. And, you know, it's rewarding because you, as Judge Becker mentioned, you're, you know, meeting parents at like one of the most difficult points and moments in their lives around their most precious assets, their children. And so, you know, it's very, very important, and parents express such gratitude. And I just think it's some of the most professionally rewarding experience you can have as an attorney. So just want to make that final statement and pitch for you all supporting our family law practices.
Thank you so much. I echo that completely. And if you're interested in working with children, you know, you're a lawyer first and foremost, and your duty is to zealously advocate for the best interests of kids. But if you haven't played Uno in a while, or Play-Doh, or colored, you know, it can be a perk of being a guardian ad litem. So that is not the main reason to do it. But this is important work. We're dealing with people, we're dealing with families, real issues, rights and obligations. Sometimes it helps to just think about how it might matter in your life, or where there might be overlap with your values, and what it can feel like without a lawyer, or just operating in a system that truly isn't set up for you. So there's so much opportunity, there's so much need. Thank you for joining us to hear us talk about some of this today. Look out for a follow-up from Washington Council of Lawyers. Also, if you want to follow up about other opportunities with the court and you know, observing hearings, for example, you can contact Jody. I noticed she dropped that in the chat, so thank you so much, Jody, for that. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the Pro Bono Week in DC. There are other events. You can check out Washington Council of Lawyers website to find additional opportunities. There is just so much happening. So thank you for being a part of it with us. Judge Becker, thank you for joining us in your busy schedule. And the same is true to you, Meridel, Melody, and Jenadee. Thank you all for being here for this panel. Have a great day. Take care.
You.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.